I'm actually loving all the nonsense that is surfacing in society these days. It really leaves us wondering, does our government serve us? Recently, young Namibians have had to protest a number of social ills which shouldn't even be issues in a modern society, and yet here we are, backward and colonized mentally still. So even after the whole constitution for this newly independent Namibia was drafted and applauded, we had utterances like this by former President Sam Nujoma.
Lesbian and homosexualism. This we condemn and rejected them in Namibia.
We've had a number of members of the ruling party making homophobic statements publicly, including the SPYL's Ephraim Nkongo and the party Secretary General, dismissing questions on the party's stance on gay rights after being asked, and even the party's Elders Council issuing statements. Check this out. Moreover, statistics said that 90% of the Namibian population is Christian. Therefore, practicing sodomy in Namibia is highly unacceptable. Later it reads, further, our founding father, Dr. Sam Shafishuna Nujoma, the first president of Namibia, cannot be forced to apologize when he was talking about what is good or bad for the people of Namibia, as some of the gays are demanding. And it ends with, the founding father is also entitled to his own opinion as a leader. And then those who claim to represent God gathered at Zoo Park to demonstrate against government's consideration of repealing archaic laws, as announced in the media recently. Just listen to this.
Say no to the promotion of same-sex marriage in the nation of Namibia.
Amen.
We say no to the repealing of the sodomy law in Namibia. Amen. Can I hear amen?
Amen.
The church in Namibia takes a strong stance, yes, and calls for the strengthening of laws in Namibia to prohibit same-sex marriage in Namibia.
Yes.
Based on the fact that marriage is defined as a union between one man and one woman, as upheld by the Supreme Court of the Republic of Namibia in 2001.
Thank you for your mercy, Lord God, that we still have time to repent, Lord God, of this evil and that's coming against our family, against your bloodline, Lord God. We repent in the name of Jesus.
Tears for who? I mean, the church really doesn't have the best track record, not just globally, but locally as well. There is fresh blood in the activism space, as Namibian youth have put democracy to the test with a number of protests against the various injustices Namibians endure. I met with Omar van Reenen and Ndilo Nthengwe, who started a non-profit organization advocating for the rights of marginalized communities in our country called Equal Namibia.
The Namibia Equal Rights Movement, or known as Equal Namibia, started on the 21st of March 2021, our Republic's Independence Day. It really birthed out of the Paul and Maya case to reunite the family and to advocate for basically the citizenship of those of their children, because right now they are reunited but they are still stateless. But we really saw that we don't really have any freedom as LGBTQ communities to celebrate. You know, what are we celebrating on Independence Day? Our community is still living in the shadows, still living on the margins of society. We also realize that there are many more LGBTQ-centered cases that we need to advocate for. We realize that beyond Paula and Maya's advocacy advocacy to be reunited with their parents. There are many more LGBTQ plus centered court cases. In this year alone, there's more than 10 active LGBTQ court cases against one ministry, and that's the Ministry of Home Affairs, Immigration, Safety and Security. So there's really a crusade against the LGBTQ existence by state-sanctioned homo and transphobia, and by our ministries using public policy to continue to oppress a minority group. So Equal Namibia was conceived as, or concepted as a coalition of both NGOs and civil society organizations, but it's community-based and it's grassroots-led, because we believe in the people power. This is the people's social movement, but more importantly, we believe in the power of intersectionality and intersectional advocacy, because LGBTQ rights affects Indigenous people, it affects women, it affects Black Namibians, it affects impoverished Namibians disproportionately than any other social group. So it's a coalition of intersectional bodies and people and civil society organizations that are fighting for one main goal, and that is the constitutional promise and protection of LGBTQ people and the constitutional emancipation of LGBTQ rights. Let me first address that LGBTQ issues or rights is not a bedroom matter. My rights does not stop and start in the bedroom. So this is more about the right to privacy, Article 13. This is about Article 10, equality under the law and freedom from discrimination. This is about Article 8, the respect for human dignity. And this is about the preamble of the Constitution, that this is a democratic constitutional republic where the Constitution was formulated to protect all minority groups and expand the fundamental rights in the Bill of Rights to all minority groups, not limit them. But to your question about policing love, this is nothing new in Namibia, especially in a born-free Namibia. This is something our nation knows and has seen. The scars of discrimination in this country comes from our colonial apartheid past, where my parents and Ndilo's parents their love was policed. There was no allowing of interracial marriages. The policing of free love between blacks and coloreds and Europeans was very much used through public policy to police their free love. Now we see a government who fought for that liberation of free love. The oppressed liberation movement and freedom fighters continue to oppress. The oppressed have become the oppressors. And now free love is not being policed between people of different social groups, but it's being policed between people of different gender identities and sexual minorities. So freedom for who? Equality for who? Heterosexual, cisgender Namibians, or all Namibians who do not have the constitutional promise of equality?
There is too much hate in this land, and the way we treat each other is a clear testament to that. I spoke to the founders of Equal Namibia about the prevalence of homophobia in this country.
It's a very much entrenched problem, and which makes it so much more prevalent. And that's because people do not understand entrenched homophobic belief systems and attitudes. And that is also dovetailed by patriarchal, misogynistic norms and attitudes that are fueled and continue to fuel homophobic, transphobic, biphobic, and the different pejorative behavior and treatment towards the community. So what we look like is, for example, when I was still with my previous organization, when we went into the different regions just to train them on human rights and also about their equality and the Constitution, all of that, is that many of the community members did not really understand what their human rights were, especially in relation to access to services. And this looks at really law enforcement services, healthcare services, education services. So what we see is that entrenched attitudes towards the treatment of the community, that they do not have access anymore to justice, access to healthcare, access to education. But importantly is that, yes, they may have access to an education because of the many other forms that now our education institutions allows for free, for free education and all of that. But there are high school dropout rates, and most of them also consist of the LGBTQ plus community. And that is definitely exacerbated by bullying, stigmatization, prejudice within the school systems, and especially with the community on healthcare systems. We really look at continuous stereotyping and stigmatization within the healthcare facilities that now results in the community members not going to a specific health facility because of that ongoing, degrading of their humanity and their identity. Then we come to law enforcement, the important aspect really of access to justice, the first entry point to access to justice, where you also find that they are intimidated there, they are bullied there, and thus also they are degraded, their humanity, their identity. So it's entrenched institutionally, and so the way that the community relates to the general public is that there's also that overarching fear that they experience, that they carry with them from the institutions into their communities. So because the community is also very, very small, in many different groups and towns, it's very hard to really have that support and solidarity where they feel that, okay, they can go to a specific lawyer's office or someone's office, just to understand what their human rights are and really how to access justice with these other different organizations. And so that is where Equal Namibia comes in. For example, as Omar really highlighted on the court cases, because it's not really been done before, where court cases are intensified and where there's public awareness and public input on the ongoing court proceedings. And that Equal Namibia does very effectively, because now the community knows that, okay, this is what goes on in a court, especially on issues. But the intention then is to look at how community members can be sensitized further and empowered on court proceedings, for example. As he mentioned, there are 10 LGBTQ plus cases before our court, but those ones are mostly the ones that have access to resources and have more socioeconomic privilege and mobility. So when we come down to the average LGBTQ plus person who perhaps doesn't have the resources but needs the tools and the information, this is where Equal Namibia can really be instrumental in this process for them.
The lack of support for LGBT communities in Namibia is also clearly visible with their reported brutal attacks on their members.
Especially last year when we saw the blatant police brutality, especially during the Shut It All Down movements and the protests. And that was very much indicative of how we've seen the entrenched misogyny and abuse of power again, and also the blatant disregard for the protesters that were unarmed and that were innocent, peaceable protesters that were able to protest also democratically according to our constitution that provides those provisions and those rights. So then we come back to, again, the ongoing police presence, even within the LGBTQ plus space, where yes, they are meant to escort you, but at the same time, you don't feel safe. You don't feel very, very supported by the police, especially because yes, they can escort us, but now coming to a specific case where someone has to open a case, again, they go there and they are antagonized and their identity is again reduced. So there have been ongoing police brutality cases that have been periodic, and that has also been very, very momentous in the terms of identifying really the root cause and the power abuses and the power imbalances that we experience. There's one of the Mercedes Van Kluter's court case, a trans woman that was again also harassed by a police officer, and in their past court case, that specific police officer did not show up for their own court case. So that again shows to how they abuse power, and yet again there's no sense of accountability or window of accountability, because how could they let this police officer escape or disappear for some reason when we've had this trans woman show up, show bare, and really put themselves in front of the courts to say, but this is what has happened to me. And if it was not the case that they were not targeted as a trans woman, then what other explanation, reasonable explanation do you have? We've had last year peaceable, innocent protesters arrested again by police, saying that we were being destructive, saying that we were disrespectful. But again, that was just a cop-out, because disrespectful on what grounds, on what terms, And they even made sure that they had special ops in the presence of young protesters, as young as 16 years old, as 12 years old. In fact, even minors were arrested on that same day. And that is something that I don't know if our government, the entirety of it, will ever really admit and really be apologetic about.
Finally, we chatted about how Namibians can rally together to show support to those with alternative sexual orientations.
I would say that Namibians are very much woke on their hate, right? Because they may not be woke necessarily on exactly what intersectional human rights advocacy looks like, and how to continuously prioritize women's issues, LGBTQ plus issues, persons living with disabilities issues, and other minority affected groups. But they are definitely woke on hate and transphobia and homophobia. It is very evident with their attitudes and the way that they treat the community. But what I can say though is that Namibians should not reduce LGBTQ matters to civil or social issues. It's a human rights issue. So when we look at it from that lens of human rights, then it's not about social issues like COVID-19 supply relief, or COVID-19 relief food packages, for example, that is social where you distribute this. No, it's really about human rights that are intrinsic in every person, and that every person, every Namibian deserves also, and also should uphold within the best of looking at our constitution and equality. So it's really looking at upholding human rights through and through, that is intersectional, that continues to prioritize every minority group that has been affected, especially since before independence and coming into the year. So it's not a social issue, it's a human rights issue. And once people begin to understand that this is something that is intrinsic within everybody, then it will not be reduced to other forms of social issues like COVID-19 relief packages or other things that really have nothing to do with who you are, your dignity as a person. And of course, yes, that does include, it is part of that, because what we've seen is there have been a lot of, again, prioritization, hierarchy comments around why should civil society organizations be prioritized during COVID-19 relief packaging or distribution, especially for the LGBTQ plus representative CSOs. And that again speaks to their nature about, we are dealing again with job creation, or we are dealing with bread and butter issues, we are dealing with this. So yes, those will be socio-economic issues, but we're talking about human rights that should be at the center of addressing all of those socio-economic issues. So you have human rights in the center, and then everything else pulls towards the center in order to make sure that the community feels dignified and that their humanity is also seen.
Equal rights founders Ndilo Nthengwe and Omar van Reenen shared their views on how we can all get involved in creating a world with less division, more tolerance, and a little more love.
The best way to support, I would say, is get involved with civil society organizations. There are so many right now, as you also mentioned with now Equal Namibia, that is a grassroots community-led organization, and really information, because what people really go on or bank on is just their own rhetoric about ideology that they have internalized and continue now to weaponize against the community. So it doesn't come from an informed perspective and basis. Yes, they may use other forms of sectors like religion, science, and all the many other different sectors to debase and to dehumanize the community. But really what it comes back to, as I mentioned, is human rights. And when you follow the news, when you follow information, when you follow movements and grassroots activism, that's when you can really be informed. That's when you can really become sensitized to the community. I think that the onus should be on the public themselves to make sure that they armor themselves with the information, because we have civil society organizations that continuously work within regions, but also the burden is also very, very, it's a lot also. And the trauma that you continue to carry of community members that continue to hurl all sorts of comments and insults at your work and at your programs, that is a lot to take in. So the onus should be on the public to really make sure that they try to seek information. Otherwise, it's really just ignorance and bliss and thriving off an institutional misogyny and homophobia that they've already continued to perpetuate all of these many years.
To get involved, I would say, is to use the democratic process which our liberators have fought for and which our constitution entails. Vote. Get registered to vote and vote. Don't just vote for the party your parents' loyalty ascribes to, but vote for your values as a Namibian. And what are your values? Are your values entrenched in acceptance, tolerance, diversity? Because that is what our constitutional strives for. And that is what every Namibian should strive for in their work, in their voting, in everything. So vote for a party that is not performative, but is transformative, especially on the issue of human rights. Vote for a party that stands up for each and every Namibian, that puts people before party, people before profits, and people before their loyalty to their party. Vote for a party that will not use their office to beat the drums and fan the flames of hate, to use their to appoint ministers who use their public office and public policy to continue to marginalize, discriminate, ostracize a minority group. Vote for a party that will not be silent in the face of hate, that will not be silent in condemning hate, that will not be silent in bringing a question to the floor. Honourable Minister, why are you creating stateless children? Honourable Minister, why are you separating families? Mr. President, why do you have members in your cabinet that are misusing their office and stepping on the constitution that our founding fathers in this very party have fought for? Vote for a party that will be quick to release statements that will stand up for LGBTQ people, for people with disabilities, for women, for indigenous people. Vote for a party that will stand up for Article 10, equality for each and every Namibian.
So I'm like, which party is that?
Honestly and frankly, right now, none. None, no member from, besides the Minister of Justice, from the ruling party has stood up for LGBTQ people. No member from the opposition party or no opposition party has stood up against the hate that the Swapa Party Youth League has incited, the violence that they have incited. No opposition party has, to my knowledge, questioned the ministers or sent a letter to the ruling party demanding that these issues be brought to Parliament, or that demanding that these that they stop misusing their public office to discriminate against a minority group. And frankly, LGBTQ rights is not only a human rights issue, but it is a civil rights issue of our generation.
Equal Namibia's Ndilo Nthengwe spoke about some of the archaic laws which we seem to just have copy and pasted to our application for our independence. You know, as we do. Great policies on paper, follow through dololo.
Now when we come to the specific laws and the acts that continue to criminalize in one way or another, ideologically and materially, the livelihoods of LGBTQ plus persons, we can already look at recently the LRDC submitted a report to the Ministry of Justice, and that was really looking at abolishing sodomy law and the sexual offences and unnatural sexual acts or something. That report, sorry, the name is very, very loaded, or the title is very loaded, and it speaks specifically to sodomy because sodomy had encompassed so many aspects of sexual acts, right? It was only later on reduced to sodomy that includes consensual intercourse between two males, and that was also now put together with bestiality and unnatural sexual offenses. So before, sodomy really looked at for example, just to be more explicit, sexual intercourse or anal intercourse between opposite and same-sex couples, between Christians and Jews, and masturbation of two same-sex men, and at the same time also oral masturbation between both opposite and same-sex. So sodomy really criminalized and criminalizes everyone in society because everyone does it or everyone has done it. And to be very explicit, that is the truth, and that's why it must be very much abolished. But because sodomy surrounds mainly gay men, that is now the situation where we are looking at those ideological belief systems, that sodomy is now also reduced to bestiality and unnatural sexual offenses. And in fact, according to the Criminal Procedure Act of 1977, sodomy is paired with all of the other many hard crimes in our country, like murder and rape. And according to now, because the Combating of Rape Act also now recently changed, that said non-consensual is rape, and before that was sodomy. They said sodomy was a form of rape, which it isn't. And at the same time, theft as well. So all of these ones are paired in the same Criminal Procedure Act. And one thing I really wanted to highlight is, according to the Criminal Procedure Act of 1977, of the offenses of 40, 41, 42, 43, because this one is a criminal procedure or is a sexual offense under 40 or something, this one actually looks at how the police has a toolkit or training kit that has sodomy there as a form for prosecution. So the many evidence that was shown was that even if you do not have, as the police or law enforcement, if they do not have the sufficient information on the crime on sodomy, they can still use heavy and grave, force on an LGBTQ plus person that has been reported committing sodomy.
And with that, it's a wrap. Thanks for watching.